Labs for inviting us today and allowing us to share what we know with a broad audience. So today we're talking about inserting quality into every step of deployment. My name is Chris Riley. I am a DevOps analyst at large and editor of the site sweetcode.io. And before I introduce our panel, let's just spend just a few seconds talking about going over what we're going to talk about today, because this thing called continuous testing, while the terminology is relatively new, the desire to test applications throughout the development lifecycle has always been there. And so really what we're going to explore is in modern delivery chains, which are evolving rapidly and releasing software faster than ever before, how do we keep quality up to pace with that and not allow it to inhibit these fast deployments and rapid release cycles? So today we have an awesome panel. For over the last 3 years, I've had a chance to get to know these guys, and they come from a diverse background inside the software delivery chain, all the way from development to integration and deployment. And they're going to be able to share with us what they have experienced in their roles and what they're seeing in the evolution of software delivery. So let's start left to right, starting with Zach. Just give a few sentences on your background and who you are.
My name is Zachary Flower. Currently, I am a senior engineer at Automox and a freelance technical writer. I've been doing backend software development for about 8 years now. In my current role, I spend a lot of time pushing forward shift left testing strategies and ensuring that testing is something that can happen at every point in the delivery chain.
Sure. Greg Sypolt, Director of Quality Engineering at Gannett. You may have heard of USA Today Network. I've been a blog writer for Fixate for roughly about 3 to 4 years, and you may have seen some of my content on SAS Labs. I'm responsible for leading a large quality engineering team, from test infrastructure, where we're building tools, to also owning CI/CD operations, where we're managing our own CI platform using Docker and Kubernetes. And I also have software developers and tests. We're focusing on being the voice of automation within each of the products at USA Today, and along with quality specialists, they're being kind of the overseer of quality and holding teams more accountable and identifying quality gaps.
Hi, and I'm Mike Mackrory. I've been doing engineering for about 15 years. Currently, I work at a small company up in the Pacific Northwest called Nike. I work on their back-end commerce systems. So I've been there for about 3 years, doing primarily DevOps work. So our teams do all the engineering, all the testing, and we do all the operations, managing stuff going out to production.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right, so buckle up here, and we're going to start diving into our questions. We have 4 key categories of questions that we've created in advance. There's some questions that came in prior to the webinar, and we'll try to address some of those. And I'm sure there's going to be some that flow in at the end. So we'll do our best to get through the meat of this and answer some of your specific questions. Anything specifically related to SAS, SAS will follow up with answers to those after the webinar. So just to frame this, and let's just start at the very beginning. We'll go in the same order as the intros. How have you been seeing quality change as the modern delivery chain has been changing as well, with microservices, continuous delivery, continuous deployment? So Zach, how have you seen the need for quality and the way quality assurance or quality engineering is taking place in the modern environment?
That's a really good question. I think at the highest at the organizational level, one of the biggest changes I've seen is the relationship between QA and development has seemed to become far less contentious than it has in the past. Years ago, there was always kind of an us versus them mentality between development and QA, where dev wanted to push out new features, and all QA did was, it seemed like, hold those features back. And that always kind of made us butt heads. But as testing becomes a first-class citizen, the understanding of what quality means is turn the dev QA feedback loop into a positive one, bonded by common goal of releasing software with as high quality as possible.
So Zach, let me dig into that a little bit more, because in the DevOps field, the term culture and getting along better and all that stuff is talked about a lot. But when it comes down to execution, it's nobody so far that I know of has given a really good, these are the 5 steps that you follow to have everybody get along. Did you see this happen more organically, or did you see it come down as a mandate?
I've seen it happen a lot more organically. I think from a process perspective, QA is really becoming a lot less siloed than it used to be. The tooling that is available earlier in the chain, left in the chain as it were, is becoming more and more accessible, easier to interact with and utilize from the development standpoint prior to delivering features and getting things up to the QA team. So it really it makes it a lot easier to test early and often, which makes it a lot, it provides empathy, as it were, with the QA team, and it makes it a lot more collaborative.
Yeah, so in some respects, it was out of necessity. Now, Greg, you've already mentioned in your organization, like the actual structure of your organization has changed to adapt to modern delivery. What else are you seeing in modern delivery change?
I think one of the main things is you're really shifting the quality ownership to where everybody on the team kind of owns quality, from product owners all the way up to, say, the quality engineering team. That allows everybody early in the stage to be talking about what needs to happen from a quality standpoint, what needs to be tested, and who's going to own it. And having that happen early in the process, you're not waiting later down the path where, it's kind of way too late for those moments. And so that's one of the things that's helping us. And I think this embedding the quality engineers within the team and understanding what's being developed, we're in that process at the beginning.
Mike, how about you? Where in the creating of these pipelines have you seen quality shift around? Are you seeing it shift left as well?
Yes, definitely. So we, the organization I'm a part of, they built kind of from the ground up with this idea of quality and engineering existing side by side. And so in our teams, the engineers and the QA people both do development and they both do testing. And because of our, we do a lot of reviews and that kind of thing before we push code out to production. There's a lot of just organic cross training between quality and the engineers. And just, quality people, just with different backgrounds, see things differently and find different solutions to problems, different things to test. And so we've got this wonderful mesh of engineering background people and quality background people, both developing code, both developing tests, and it's given us a much more comprehensive, testing strategy to push code out.
I mean, to add to that, Chris, too, before you move to the next question, I think the other thing that's happening more as development teams are kind of blurring the lines between dev and QA, I think we're balancing out that testing portfolio and actually scoping out a clear, more efficient quality strategy, which allows us to shift left to testing things at a much lower level than in the more traditional testing methods where everything was happening more at the UI level, which everybody knows that's very brittle, it's really slow, and it's hard to scale. And I think that's part of that new modern delivery chain.
Yeah, and what really gets me is, were we to have this webinar 2 years ago talking about the same stuff, a lot of us would be going, yeah, we just can't do it because, organizational structure, whatever. And now it seems like organizations, like I was asking Zach, it's much more organic. There is acceptance and stewardship of DevOps and modern software delivery. And what some of the attendees might be grappling with is their organization. And now we see it in large and small organizations. So it's hard to argue that this isn't a good thing. But some of the attendees might be grappling with the fact that their organization hasn't allowed this type of change to occur. You know, they haven't either taken the initiatives on the organizational side, or they just haven't created a standard around it. So that's one thing that I've always kind of been curious about. And maybe we can piggyback on that a little bit and lead into the next question, like why, you know, we talk about the what, but why are we doing this? What is the benefit of continuous testing? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, it's a huge benefit that we've seen. I think the biggest benefit we have is just the shortness of the feedback loop. We try work on really small stories, and we check them into our pipeline as often as we can. So, you know, we'll have one team putting out maybe 10, 15 builds a day. When you push that into the pipeline, with all the tests that we run and that kind of thing, you know within a few minutes if your code is going to run successfully in production or not, and it gets pushed back to you. Other guys who are developing can pull that latest code down as well, begin into the work they're working on, run their tests locally. You don't have this problem where you wait till the end of the week or to the end of the release cycle, push stuff out into production and then find your bugs, or you push it to QA and then find your bugs. We find bugs within minutes of submitting our code, and so you can fix those bugs quicker. And anytime we fix bugs, we're adding more tests to our suite. It's enabled us to be a lot quicker. We're a lot more nimble, and the code we're putting out is just significantly higher quality than we have in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, to that point, Mike, I see that a lot in the development side too. That shortening of the feedback loop. It definitely makes life a lot easier because you're not wasting so many engineering calories on things like support, triage, and hot fixes of issues that could have been saved had there been more testing across the entire chain already.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
which allows that faster feedback loop to whichever, you know, to echo that, you know, I think we're testing it almost on every pull request that's coming in. Traditional way, it was all, in a traditional way, you was always waiting for that PR to be merged into some type of QA or even maybe a pre-prod environment. Allowing to test on every PR and every kind of environment along that path to production. It provides feedback along the way as you're working in a development environment. Now you're integrating your code with other developers and everything, and then maybe you can even test in production because you've built all this continuous testing in the sense of around automation to where it's giving you constant feedback where you can monitor your tests from that standpoint.
I'm curious, in the modern software delivery chain, do people still talk about technical debt? Because if you're always kind of keeping up, isn't that the point? You're always kind of keeping up with stuff. Is that even a conversation anymore?
I think it's still a conversation. You have to have a mindset change or more of a cultural change that there's still going to be maintenance with automation because you're constantly changing or adding new features. And so in the past, it might have been the QA team would only own the breakage of the test, which creates technical debt. To remove the technical debt, I think the whole team, that what I mentioned earlier, it has to be an ownership to where if the developer makes a UI change, they should be aware that they may need to update some type of test, or if they're changing the API endpoint, they need to make sure they update that endpoint.
Yeah, no organization comes out of the gate with a process established. Processes evolve over time for what makes sense for them. So technical debt is kind of an inevitability no matter how you look at it. But you know, as you move more and more towards continuous testing, it kind of helps reduce the impact of that debt, at least as the goal.
Okay, great. So now I'd like to go through, starting with Zach, you know, how has this impacted your job? So getting down to the details, right? How has it changed what you do? Now, Zach, as a developer, are you spending more time addressing bugs, or do you feel like you actually get to spend more time building new functionality?
That's a tough one. I guess it depends on the week, doesn't it? If we're fixing bugs or if we're building new features. But you know, as a developer, as a backend developer, I am about as far left in the process as you could get. And actively shifting left is one of my primary focuses because I'd like to catch bugs and catch problems, really cover myself before I send anything up to QA. At this point, if I push up bugs that get caught in QA before my test suite catches it, I feel bad because it's my responsibility now too. It's not something that I can just pass on to the next guy. One of the problems with shift left, though, that a lot of organizations tend to have is that not that it's difficult to do, but it's time consuming. And in a lot of ways, writing and creating a good test suite, or even just good unit test coverage for a new small feature, can take a lot more time than the actual development. And since it's not a set it and forget it proposition, it requires a lot of time and energy to do it properly. So that's one of the biggest challenges. So I like to really encourage making sure the tests are fast, making sure they're easy to run, because the easier they are to integrate into the process earlier on, the more likely that they will get run, that the tests will be run before a PR is even open, that the team will be comfortable using them, and it'll be an asset rather than something slowing them down.
To add to what Zach is talking about there, one of the things that, allows my team to get closer to the picture is enabling that continuous testing is about, do I have the infrastructure in place to where it can be repeatable and disposable for a development environment, to where I can move within speed, using containers and stuff like that. I can spin up the environment, but also replicate like the whole system really quickly. Being part of the, owning CI/CD allows us to get a little closer and push teams to make sure they have the right quality gates in there. But at the end of the day, I think to really enable continuous testing, it really starts at, with your CI/CD. If you're using some, cloud service or building your own, that needs to be repeatable and disposable as fast so you can move at speed on every pull request and everything. And second is making sure that you can replicate your environments from a staging environment to a production so they're in sync with each other, especially really complex systems that, where you're reading and, updating and deleting data and stuff like that. You need to make sure that you have some way to replicate that so it really enables the testing so you don't have conflicts and collisions.
So it sounds like automation is a key aspect. Mike, what are you seeing in your role to help steward and enable the ability for shift left in testing everywhere?
One of the things that we did, and when I started at Nike, I actually came in as an engineer, but I went onto a quality engineering team. And the quality engineering and the quality assurance at Nike is all about enabling teams. So instead of running tests and that kind of thing, their primary responsibility is helping to set up these pipelines, helping to make the tools to perform the testing and write the test easy to access for developers, and providing good documentation and good examples for them. So I saw a lot of upfront investment in making that easier. And then how it is now, we don't send stuff to QA. We're just, everyone does everything. And it's made, I think Zach talked about the ownership of the code, how you don't want to pass bugs on. When we pass bugs on, they go directly to our customers. So it's a huge deal for us. But there's definitely a sense of pride in getting your coverage percentage a lot higher, making sure your code is fully covered. We run security tests against it, making sure those pass. The teams just have a lot more ownership and a lot more pride in the work they're doing. And everyone is thinking about security. They're thinking about quality. They're thinking about good customer experience as they're developing. But it's taken a lot of investment. There's been a lot of training we've gone to, and it's just a lot of and just investment in the teams and in the tooling that the teams can use.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not a big fan of the term culture at all. But no matter what, this level of accountability, interest, and pride, like you were talking about, is a very personal thing that the team has to bring forward. Like that element seems to have to be there. And to the extreme, you talk about organizations like Slack and Airbnb, who the developers are on call for their own code. So it's a radical shift. And for the morale of that to be okay, you really have to embrace this idea of it's not just throw it over the fence and hope that everything goes okay. You really want it to work in production. So now we get to the big question, and culture is part of the big question. And always, organizations are like, yeah, that's great, but I don't control that. I've had some hard conversations with the QA people and developers. I said, well, if your organization's not going to support it, maybe it's time for a change. Who knows? But how does one, on a more tactical front, Mike, how does one get started? How does an organization start, It seems like automation's a huge part of this. Where can they start to make a meaningful difference?
I think embedding your quality people inside your development teams is probably the first thing that you'll want to do. And it's hard to do because you've got different mindsets coming together. But if you can do that and have them cross-train, and have your quality people start actually developing code, and then have your engineers start doing that, it's hard to get those two kind of groups of people to mix. But I think if you can start there, and then enable them with ways to automate their testing, and give them the tools they need, that's probably the best way to do it. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of upfront investment.
Yeah, to that
Great.
point, Mike, one of the things that I see, or one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of organizations make is when estimating tasks and projects. QA tests, things like that aren't included in the estimates.
Wow.
And that's a challenge. If you're not including testing in the estimates, then you're always going to be playing from behind. It's always going to feel like a last thought, and it's going to be the first thing you drop when you need to get a feature out. So to push it forward in your organization, it's important to include those concepts in your estimates, in your planning as well, because they are a priority and they should be a top priority, not an afterthought.
Yeah, and something you can do to help that, I know we've had trouble implementing this, but you can do it at various levels of expansion, I guess. Test-driven development is a huge thing for us. Engineers, it's hard to get them to adapt to it, but even in your story process, if you start with the test, if your product owner comes up with the test that you want to run against a specific feature, starting with that test in mind, I think helps everyone start thinking about the end result and how you're going to test it before they even start thinking about how to implement it.
And Greg, we've talked in the past, and your organization in particular had a specific approach that I thought was very interesting. It was like centralized but not. Can you talk a little bit about how your group specifically is supporting a very large organization, spread across many entities?
Yeah. So when I originally started at Econet about 4 years ago, they was completely manual. And so how we operated is we created kind of the quality engineering team, which rolled up to the platform as a service team, which is very unique to have the quality team there. But they was providing a service for all the dev teams by building the platform. Well, we kind of was doing the exact same thing for my quality engineering team. Is we was working as a SAS model, is we was building tools and solutions for the dev teams to kind of take over and show them how to build those. To start that, it started with me being, the architect on the team and trying to interview each of the teams and understand what they needed from me so I could build the right tool set for them. And then from that standpoint, it's about coaching and mentoring them and everything. And then you take it another step is what constraints do I have? Do I have the right, resources or talent or skill sets on my team? And, and do I need to teach certain individuals on my team how to do, continuous testing around writing automation? But maybe it's blurring the lines because I was on the platform team and we kind of started doing DevOps stuff too, to where we could, start owning the whole CI infrastructure, right? And then teaching devs how to actually just first from continuous testing is just building and, deploying their applications in a continuous manner, is kind of testing it out in that sense. And then you're just adding quality gates along that path there. There's other things that, comes to mind to me, around just kind of how you build that strategy and you're working with everybody. It's challenging, but I think the SAS model has worked at providing that service. We've built a lot of labs and stuff to try to teach others how to do it. But at the end of the day, it's still a mindset and everybody still got to own it at the end of the day. It's a challenging space if you're starting from ground zero.
I think it's important to remember too, to that point, that testing isn't a switch, it's a dial. You don't have to have an entire test suite in place in one day. It's just a matter of starting with one and then adding another, and they're cumulative. They add up, and you'll eventually, over time, to Mike's point earlier, to measuring coverage. It's really just about dialing it up over time. And if it starts as a priority with one person now, that priority grows as stability gets found in the results of that.
Yeah, I mean, to even, add to that, unit testing is great, but, everybody's always focused on like, hey, I got to get to this certain percentage. I always like to say pump the brakes on the percentages piece, because if someone doesn't know how to write code, what makes them a really good tester to write, writing tests will be even good. So my point of that is make sure you focus on the critical pieces of your application, and try to build coverage in small chunks there rather than just trying to do everything at once, and then kind of build off of that and kind of build a roadmap for that.
Absolutely. Coverage is definitely a quantitative measurement, but not a qualitative one. So it doesn't tell you how good the tests are. It just tells you really what you're not testing, which could be a good indicator of at least where to put some focus.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, if that, maybe look at some of your production bugs and see, what's being reported the most, and maybe that's some of your focus is to try to get rid of some of the critical bugs and stuff from your application. That's another method of how you can get started. So you're building automation around those things, so you're not continuing breaking some of those pieces.
Yeah, I'd use that method frequently to increase test coverage and increase quality coverage. When there's a bug, every bug fix should be accompanied by a test to both validate it and the original case as well.
So
there's a lot of edge cases.
Yeah, and so I think that that's a really strong point. And I also, something I heard when you guys were talking, the question is worded, how does an organization? But it could as well been worded as, how do I? Because one element of this, and I'm assuming a lot of the attendees are thinking about their career path also. So how does, what do they need to focus on if their organization, because it sounds like to me the organization needs to buy into this as well as the individual. So let's say the organization's not buying into it. How does one look at advancing their career? Maybe they came from manual testing, and so that they can go into an organization that is supportive of automation, modern development, delivery chains, and continuous testing. Wherever.
I mean, there's a lot of good material out there today. If you're trying to make that transition from manual to automation, I think it's, very important to kind of have a hybrid approach regardless. I know recently, I think there's a blog post that was posted to SAS Labs. I think it was Michael, I can't remember his last name, but he kind of went through that process. And I think it's one, first you need to figure out what, tech stack you may want to learn, right? You need to at least know some programming language to kind of start doing automation. And that's a good starting point, just to start there and build a foundation.
Great.
I also think from to that point, beyond just the technical ability to get started with continuous testing, it really is a mindset as well. Taking ownership for your code doesn't just mean taking ownership for what you deliver. It means taking ownership for the bugs as well that come out of it. So even if an organization that you're in is not fully bought into the idea of continuous or automated testing, that doesn't mean that you are unable to write tests and to have your own test suite. I mean, it's really your own way of ensuring the code that you put up is as high quality as possible. Yeah,
and you can lead by example, and you can certainly demonstrate some progress through that. All right, well, this has been great, guys. Let's start to dive into other questions. I like that you addressed the test coverage question, because that came up prior to the webinar. And it's interesting because I do think that organizations get hung up on perfecting their test suite before even diving in, as in, like, that's a prerequisite to beginning with continuous testing, and it's not necessarily. So let's start to look at what people are asking. I'm opening my questions here, and see if we can address some of the specific questions that have come through. So And we covered getting started, which is great. So one thing that we've seen, because we've brought up the term shift left, right? And I think, Greg, when we were talking before, it's kind of shift left and shift right, especially when you start to talk about, what you do in production. So,
Sure.
let's define shift left a little bit more. What does that mean? And is shift right a thing?
Yeah, so shift left is really about like having a fast feedback loop in the sense of like my trigger point is when a creation of a pull request of a code change just came in, it's now triggering some type of test that will basically validate that PR request is good. And so there's multiple layers there. It depends. It could be a laundry list of tests that you want to execute against that, and you want to get that feedback as fast as possible. The traditional way was, they would create a pull request and someone would review it and then maybe it would get merged. And they may ran a few unit tests and stuff and then it would get merged and it would go to a QA environment and that was too far down the path. And so that kind of shifting left, there's various things that you can run there. If you're thinking about from my side, from a CI/CD standpoint, where we're owning the pipeline, and if you start using Docker and Kubernetes, the things that I would like to see us get to is in the sense of running all those types of tests in parallel at the exact same time to even speed that loop up, in the sense of where it doesn't sequentially go through a unit test and do some API tests. If we can basically containerize that and run it all at the exact same time, we're going to get that loop back to them, maybe less than 5 minutes or so, because that's kind of the service level agreement I focus on. Shift right is a thing. It's something that I have been focusing on and thinking about more around where maybe some of these terms, blue-green deployments or canary deployments. Blue-green is basically you're running 2 production environments at the exact same time. All your traffic is being served to one environment, and then the other one has got your new version. And so you're testing that new version in production with no traffic. And after you feel comfortable with that, you can flip all the traffic to it, and you can start doing some monitoring or run some additional tests off of that. If something goes wrong, you can instantly flip it back using a router where all the traffic goes back to the previous version. And now you don't have to worry about kind of like writing hot fixes and stuff because you're running that. Canary testing is something that we're really trying to focus on more in the sense we're going to take a particular region or maybe a market or something and introduce a new change, maybe 5% of the users, and kind of do some additional testing and monitoring around it. If it seems like everything's good to go, then we're going to kind of start throttling the traffic onto that new version. And the whole purpose of shifting right is if something does go wrong, you have an automatic rollback process where it's flipping back to the old version automatically.
Any other thoughts on that? Shift left versus shift left?
I think with shift right, you get when you're testing, you can only test so many scenarios, and your end users are going to be doing things that you've never even dreamed of. And shifting right, actually putting that code out in production. In order to do that, you need to have a lot of monitoring. You need to have the infrastructure in place to handle putting out like canary deployments or even just pushing a code into production. But if you can push code out and have it be monitored, you can allow your end users to almost test that code in a way, see how they interact with it. And just the volume of users coming through can be a huge benefit to your organization in terms of how your software is going to respond.
Yeah, to add on to that, shift right in terms of at least the monitoring point that you made, it allows you to get ahead of the curve and identify problems before the users identify them and report them to you. So it gives you an opportunity to make a more stable production environment.
And is there also a benefit to how you design your tests? Because you're getting a different type of data, right? You're getting real user data. Does that then feed back into your test strategy?
It can. I mean, you could also, as you're the monitoring type of testing and stuff, maybe you're going to do some more AI and machine learning. You're trying to learn your production data and you want to maybe replay that, production data by hitting your top 15 queries or maybe the top 15, kind of like flows or journeys the users are taking and ensure that's still working.
Mm-hmm. Great. So one of the questions, and this question always comes up, is great, we're going faster and things are changing and there's culture and there's stewardship and there's accountability. Who owns the test suite then? So who then is responsible for creating the test, managing the test suite, et cetera?
From my perspective, it's the developer and the quality engineer on that team. It's a joint responsibility. And like in my perspective, we typically only have maybe one or two on a team of maybe 5 to 10. And so if they're making a change and it's early in the process and we identify that, they should be the ones kind of maintaining and fixing, the tests when that is happening, rather than for kind of pushing and saying it's always a QE type of task.
I'd agree. We have mostly, I think 90% of our, the ownership of our tests is on the engineering teams themselves.
Wow.
We do have a team that kind of manages the entire experience, because you can only test, a team's only responsible for their services. So we have a team that tests kind of end to end across the entire organization to make sure things are working. But we found they're finding very few bugs. The engineering teams themselves they've got testing in place to take care of that before it even reaches production and it reaches that team.
Yeah, we have a similar strategy. I mean, when it comes to testing, ownership really is where in the pipeline the tests are run. The further left it is, the more engineering will own the tests. The further right, obviously, the more QA tends to own the tests on our end. But it's important to remember, obviously, that while all tests will need to be run at some point, not every test needs to be run at every point. So who is responsible for the test is really who is writing and maintaining it at that stage of the pipeline.
Yeah. Yep, that's great. So one of the questions that came up, and this is interesting actually, as you guys have advanced your careers and built in more automation and really embraced continuous testing, can you point to one big lesson that you've learned during the process?
Have a clear strategy and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, on a more personal note for me, I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is you need to write code with testability in mind. It's definitely a very junior to mid-level mistake to write monolithic functions that are impossible to test. So the more concise and focused your code is, the easier it is to actually write tests around it and to validate it.
Add to that really quickly, especially UI tests. If the developers have never written a front end like Selenium test or anything, they may not be developing the application to be testable. And so having them own that piece, it teaches them to write more testable applications.
I'd agree with that. And then I think the other thing that I found is important is creating a culture, there's that word again, a culture where it's okay to make mistakes, where engineers are allowed to try different things. You're allowed to try different testing strategies, see how it works. And as long as you're failing quickly, as long as you've got that continuous feedback process and you continue to learn and grow, it's okay to make mistakes and have engineers feeling okay to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Spreading around ownership really makes a big difference in how blame, quote unquote, is distributed. Whether it's a process failure or a person failure. When everybody owns it, then it's a process failure, and it's a lot easier to adapt and fix as you move forward. People are a little bit more eager to own up to mistakes that they make, and things get fixed a lot faster.
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
So here's an interesting question, because I think we indirectly answer this question. We've talked about continuous testing supporting speed, but are you guys actually seeing notable increases in quality as well?
Oh, 100%. From my end, even just personally, there's a big difference between the quality of code that I write when I write for tests and I write without tests. We all make mistakes, and the idea behind test coverage is not to tell you did something wrong and to throw your bugs in your face. The idea is to help you adapt to those mistakes and make sure that what you're delivering is quality and it works and it's doing what you expect it to do.
I would agree. I echo everything that Zach's, kind of saying. It's still not perfect. You're going to still have holes, and some of the holes you may still have is around your user stories and acceptance criteria, where everybody on the team missed a very critical piece of the acceptance criteria, and that kind of created some type of production bug that you didn't even think about. But it's about kind of learning from that mistake and kind of pivoting and making sure to build a guard around that.
Fantastic.
I think the other thing is you start looking at tests as a way to protect yourself. They're there to make sure you're not introducing bugs inadvertently. And it's not just the tests you're writing when you're adding a feature aren't just for that feature. So when someone else in a few weeks touches something similar to that, something in a similar place to that code, and it inadvertently impacts your feature, those tests there prevent your code from being impacted from that and bugs that are a combination of the two features going out.
Great. Excellent. So that's kind of been the tone of all the questions here. For those who are asking about the link to the recording and the slides, those are going to be delivered, in a few days via email. So I want to go one by one, starting with Zach. Is there any final thoughts you would like to leave everybody with? Experiences, best practices, tips, tricks?
Personally, I'm a huge proponent of testing everything. We hear a lot of talk just in the engineering side of unit and integration tests, and a lot of times all the other types of tests are kind of ignored because they don't affect us directly. But there are a handful of API documentation standards, for example, that make it possible to test the accuracy of your API documentation. And establishing load and performance testing processes before you need them is going to go a long way in the future, because there's nothing worse than scaling past your means and not having a reliable way to replicate the issues caused by it. So thinking of testing as a way to get ahead of the curve makes a huge difference in how much value it'll provide to you in the future.
For me to add, one of the new things we started doing at Inventory, doing test coverage inventory survey, and sending it out to product owners, developers, even designers, and even the quality team to understand how they're actually testing their products, and see how well they actually know that process. If people kind of mark everything as I don't know, that's kind of identifying we have a quality gap that we need to address there. Part of creating that survey, you take some time and sit down and create your quality playbook. How are you testing your infrastructure from Docker files to Chef? Is unit testing, API testing, how are you going to do those type of tests? Are you doing performance, security? Have that playbook and make sure you kind of communicate that playbook to everybody, so when they go into sprint planning and stuff, they can start kind of scoping out those quality tasks during the sprint. And then the last piece, I would say, if you're starting from ground zero, focus on the infrastructure of your testing frameworks and stuff to ensure that, one, they can really kind of test at scale, because as you start adding more tests over time, you don't want to see your test suite go from 5 minutes to, say, an hour. You want to stay at 5 minutes, and it comes with a cost to kind of continue to kind of run in horizontal like that. And lastly, to set clear expectations and standards around what it takes to write a really good test, and all those good things that come in part of design patterns of being a software developer.
And then I'd add, what I've noticed is, and I've heard this from other people too, is that the software you're developing is a direct reflection of your organization. If you're trying to develop software that's very interactive, that you're communicating between a lot of different little services or containers, and you have an organization that is split up, isn't communicating well, you're not going to be able to achieve that goal. You need to have, your teams need to be communicating freely with each other. They need to have testing involved inside the teams. You need to have testing inside your application. And the other thing, I think we touched on this a little bit. We talked about having code coverage goals and that kind of thing. We have code coverage goals, like targets that we work towards. but it's not a hard and fast, like you have to have 75% coverage. So we have that as a goal, that teams are free to move their coverage goals up and down, and generally the guidance they're given is to always try and move that coverage goal up. And then something else we've added is we do mutation testing as well. So mutation testing is, you have tests that they change your code to make sure that your unit tests are actually testing the code instead of just getting coverage for coverage sake. And that's made a huge difference to the quality of our unit tests, making sure that the unit tests we write are actually testing the code and testing different scenarios within that code.
Awesome. And there's something, what's it called? Chaos testing also, right? That's a term you guys are throwing around.
Can you say it again, Chris?
There's a concept called chaos testing.
Oh.
Is that true?
More of the infrastructure, yeah. There's various phases of chaos testing from your infrastructure. It kind of relies what I was talking about, the playbook, test your infrastructure, make sure it does what it should do. But I think as you're running at scale in a production environment, if a server goes down, you would hope that you have some type of auto scaling or something to where it's going to respin up that server and it's bouncing out, kind of load balancing the traffic and everything, was really important. And I feel like if you're doing that shift right mentality around, blue, green, or canary, you're going to be in the right place for that.
Great. Well, Zach, Greg, and Mike, this has been awesome, and I think I've learned something, so hopefully everybody else has as well. And SAS Labs, thanks for inviting us to join. For the attendees, I really encourage you visit SAS Labs blog, and the URL is on the screen. The three gentlemen on the call today have all contributed to the SAS Labs blog, and there's a ton of great practitioner level content in addition to information about SAS on there. And what I really heard today is that stewardship, accountability, automation are all key aspects of being able to support continuous testing, and hopefully you can take that back to your team and start to move the needle forward. But one of the more important things to know is that this is not just a concept. It's not just a term we're throwing around. This is something that large and small organizations are doing. It's been proven here today. And the fact that people are doing it is kind of one of the biggest motivators for some organizations, because you don't want to miss out, but you also have the confidence that you can do it. And that's a big deal. So hopefully if you need to get this message off to the rest of your team, you share this presentation once you get the link to the recording with everybody else, and they'll see that as well. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you, SAS. I think that concludes our webinar for the day. And look out for the email and potentially some answers to the specific SAS questions that came up during the webinar.
Thanks so much.